Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today we are doing a very late December wrap-up. So this is going to be a pretty short wrap-up because I'm not gonna lie, I can't remember a single thing about December. Did December actually happen? Did I make all of this up? I swear, like, the whole month was a complete blur. Like, really strange. So it's probably going to be a pretty short one. So let's get right on into it. So the first book that I read in the month of December was Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. I actually started this the end of November and then I finished it on like the first or second day, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. It was a really high 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. Again, I really remember enjoying it. I cannot remember a single thing. Like, I wiped December from my mind. I don't know why. But this follows Richard, and he lives a very normal, quite boring life. He has proposed to his girlfriend. Everything is going perfectly fine. And then one day he is about to go to dinner with his fiance's boss, and he comes across a girl who is really injured in the street, and he helps her out, and because of this he gets dragged into a whole magical plot where there is a London under London, and I really enjoyed it. It was really magical and whimsical, and I think that's something that he does really well, and it reminded me of A Darker Shade of Magic, which I love a lot. And I do know V. Schwab, like, Neil Gaiman is one of her favorite authors, so it totally makes sense to see those connections and inspirations. And yeah, I really enjoy this. I don't even know like what age range this is for. Like, I think adult, but also maybe YA. It's quite a timeless book, but like it can get a little bloody at the end. I enjoyed the characters. I just had a really good time with it. There was nothing about it that like really like shocked and blew me away. But overall, there was just so many nice and unique concepts in this book, and I can definitely see why so many people do love it. I didn't see the plot twist, which usually I would, and I don't even think it was like that hard to see it, but I didn't guess it, so points for that. And yeah, overall I just had a really good time with it, and I would definitely recommend it. This is my second book that I've read from him. I also read Stardust. I gave Stardust 4 stars as well, but that was like a slightly lower 4 stars because I think it's just because it's shorter, a little more rushed, and whereas this one, like, it explores his ideas a bit more because it's longer. But even then, it's like, it's still less than 400 pages and it's a really quick read. So if you're looking for a quick read, I would recommend. So then, like, the next 5 books that I'm going to talk about, I all read for the Goodreads YA fantasy video that I did. I will leave that link down below, because my opinions will probably be clearer in that. But I think this is the reason why I can't remember anything that I read in December, because I read 5 of these in like 9 days. And yeah, so that kind of filled my brain up. So whoops. But the first one I read out of them is Iron Widow by Ziran J. Zhao, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. It was a really high 4 stars as well. And again, another one I just really thoroughly enjoyed. Our main character gives herself up as a concubine to this pilot. These pilots fight in like these kind of robot creatures, and there is a male and a female pilot, and oftentimes the female pilots don't live. And her sister was a concubine and he killed her, and so she wants revenge. And they go into battle together, and she survives, but he doesn't. And so that makes her an Iron Widow, and this gives her power that she hasn't had before, and she quite likes that. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's been getting a whole lot of hype, and I definitely agree with it. So even though I didn't give it 5 stars, absolute new favorite, I can definitely see why so many people love it. And as I said, it was a really high 4 star for me, and I did really enjoy it. So the characters were so much fun. Like, she is such a morally great character. She just, like, she thinks about revenge, and then after that she's gotten her revenge, she's like, you know, I want to stay alive, I'll do what it takes, I don't care, I will like kill whoever I need to, and all of this. And then we have kind of 2 other main characters. So the guy that she is then paired with after the first dude, and everyone who goes in the cockpit with him dies. The 2 of them are like really, at first they're really like standoffish to each other, like, I will heal you. And then we also have her kind of childhood best friend who totally loves her. And the dynamic between all three of them. And the way that the love triangle goes is, in the video I did mention that the weakest part of it is actually the plot, because while there is a lot of action, there isn't necessarily a lot of plot, which sounds like it doesn't make sense, but I feel like there was like a lot of action. Okay, we're fighting these things, but we didn't know why, and it was kind of just, you know, so there was like a little bit of plot at the start, and then there was like a load of fights, and then there was kind of just like a little bit of plot, and then there was like getting to know the characters and them getting to know each other, and then there was like a small bit of plot. And so it felt a little disjointed and the pacing was a little off for me, but overall really enjoyed it. 4 out of 5 stars. I didn't realize that this was the one that I read after it, but I read These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, though kind of like thinking back on it, it's kind of closer to a 2, I think. And I was just feeling nice because I really don't have many positive feelings about this. I do not understand the hype for this one, unfortunately, at all. So this one is a Romeo and Juliet retelling set in 1920s Shanghai, and we follow Roma and Juliet, and they are the children of the leaders of these 2 gangs. And the thing that I liked the most about it was the plot, the scheming, the trying to figure out what the hell was happening, because there is this like madness that is taking over that is making people want to rip their throats out, and so they have to work together to try and figure it out. And I like that, but it just, everything else didn't really work for me. And even then, the plot at the end, like in the middle, it slowed down enormously, and there's like 50 pages that should have been like cut out. And then right at the end, it was very predictable, and that was also a bit of a letdown. And then, but like the start of it, I enjoyed that plot and the scheming and all of that. Everything else though, I did not enjoy the characters. I was not interested, I was not invested in the story and wanting to turn the pages really. I just overall did not really have a good time. As I said, I did not like the characters whatsoever, and I did not get the relationship, the hype. I felt like the 2 of them had no chemistry, despite the fact that they're supposed to have this like really deep backstory, and they, you know, they were together for this time and whatever. I didn't see it. And I just really disliked Juliet. She was so cliched and cringy, and she felt like all of the like tropes of, oh, I'm badass, and it just made her a really unrealistic character for me. Like as I've pointed out, I feel like 2 or 3 times now, like at the start of it, she has a lighter because she's badass, so of course she has a lighter on her, and someone asked her and they're like, you don't even smoke, and she's like, because of arson. And I'm like, later on she has like a beautiful like dress on because she's all fancy, and then her father's like, how many weapons do you have on you? And she's like, 10. And I'm like, this is so embarrassing. So that was a 3 stars, a very low 3 stars, almost 2. Not a good time. Then the next book that I read was Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber, and I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars as well. Oh, 3 out of 5 stars. And so again, another one that I read for that video, and this one is a sequel series kind of to the CAWPILE series. You will be spoiled for the ending of CAWPILE, but I haven't read the CAWPILE series. I have no intention of, so I didn't really care about spoiling myself for it. This definitely surprised me, I think, because there was a lot that I did like about it. Again, there was a lot that I didn't, but it had its moments. So this one, it follows a girl, and the man that she loves is getting married to her like stepsister, and she goes to the Prince of Hearts to try and stop this wedding, and doing so she like causes a lot of bother, and she says that she will in exchange for 3 kisses. And so that's what happens. Like, if you don't want to read the CAWPILE series, you really don't have to. Like, if you have no intention of reading it and don't mind being spoiled, you can totally understand this, no problem. I had no problems understanding it. Maybe like there was probably like a couple of like maybe cameos or whatever that I missed out on. I knew a couple of things. I was like, okay, so those 2 were in the other series, I'm pretty sure. And so I know that much, but there was definitely some, but there was probably some bits that I didn't pick up on. Story, it still made sense. I do think maybe like the magic system could have been explored better, but because I felt like it wasn't very explained, and it could do with some refreshing, because it wasn't really well developed, and I like knowing about complex world building and magic and all of that, and I didn't really get that there. The characters were okay. They were nothing that I was like, I fell in love with them and I just adore them. Like, I didn't. They were okay. I liked them. I found Jax interesting, and I do know that I'm pretty sure he's pretty well loved by like the CAWPILE fans. And I found him okay. He was interesting enough. I did enjoy the kind of trickster language. That's something I always enjoy, and the kind of scheming and trying to stay 3 steps ahead, which I was always like, oh, you're a dumbass. But overall, I enjoyed it, but definitely not something that like I'm gonna be thinking about for a long time. Like, it was a 3 stars. I just don't really care that much. Then the next book I read was The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. So this was a very nice surprise in that vlog because I had clearly a lot of 3 stars. And so I picked this up and I really enjoyed it. It follows a girl, and when you are 16 you undergo a purity ritual where you are made bleed, and if you bleed red then you are pure. And our main character bleeds gold, and so then she is about to be killed, but then a woman shows up and takes her away to be part of like the Emperor's army. And I really enjoyed it. As I said, I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. It was a really pleasant surprise. There was a couple of issues I had, mainly with something in the ending, and construction work has just started, so I apologize for that. So I had a couple issues with how the ending, there was like a bit of a plot hole, but like also a sequel could definitely like resolve that and make it make sense, because I can see a couple of ways that like, oh, just, you know, the way that the strategy was and all of this, like I can see ways that it makes sense, but it wasn't really explained in this. I thought the world and the magic was fascinating, and there was so many surprises in here because I heard the synopsis I gave you was basically the synopsis I had heard from everyone. Within like 40 pages that synopsis is finished and you are learning surprising things that connect to that, and I loved it because I was so shocked. I was like, no one mentioned this, and so that's why I'm not mentioning it to you either, because I loved learning about it. And I think one of the main strengths of this book is the friendships and the characters and just how they all band together to overcome what they're going through, because none of them really want to be in an army, but like it's either that or death for them, and so it's like, oh, it's your choice, but like they don't really have a choice, and the way out they all come together to be like, hey, we're gonna make the best out of this bad situation. And I really love that, and I love the dynamic between all of them. I really enjoyed it. It's a really solid YA fantasy, and so like if you are a big fan of that, I would recommend you checking it out. Then the next book I read, and the final book I read for that video, was Lore by Alexander Bracken. I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. And again, I have spoken about this recently enough because of worst books and all of this, so I'm not gonna mention it for too long, but I did not enjoy this at all. It was messy, and it just nonsensical, and I just did not have a good time. Lore grew up, and in her world, so there's like the Greek myths have happened, but they tried to like overthrow Zeus, so he was angry at them and turned them human for like 7 days, and in that time these other families get to try and kill them and take their place as like gods. And my friend also read this around the same time as me, and she DNF'd it at like 75% through, and so I ended up having to explain what happened at the end, and yeah, she was just like, oh, I'm so glad I didn't finish. I wish I didn't. But the characters, they were just so flat, and they had no development, no distinction between them, and they were really just vessels for the plot to happen. Except for the plot was also just like poorly planned. And so like I would like excuse it if the plot was good, but it wasn't. So my main issue with this whole thing is the world building, and because the Greek myths have obviously been around for a pretty long time, so you had that done for you, and it's also like an urban fantasy, so the city of New York, that has been done for you. So she only had like the tiniest bit of world building to do, and she made it so confusing and convoluted and unnecessary and messy. And she also made it extremely sexist, which yes, the Greek myths are, so I can totally understand that. Except for the fact it had no bearing on the story. You can, like, you're making this story, you're making up things on the spot, you're changing this, so like that these 7 families, they can try and take over from the gods. So like, why can't you change that? There was so much unnecessary sexism in here that really just, because especially with a lot of these books, so like Iron Widow and the Gilded ones, there was an extremely misogynistic world, but the whole point of the story was them fighting back against it and trying to make it a better place for women. And so at first I presumed that's what was going to be happening in lore. Okay, this system, it is corrupt, it is sexist, it is horrible, and she was gonna go change it. That's not what the plot was. That didn't even get addressed at all, really. And it was just like, why did you do it then? What was the point of having that in your world building? It just, yeah, no. So then the next book I read was Burmas Here by Frederick Bachman. I gave this a 4 or 5 stars. It was a pretty like middle of the road 4 stars. I think I would have liked this like a bit more if I knew a single thing about soccer, but I don't, so whoops. So this follows Britt Marie, and she has spent her whole life trying to please other people, and for the first time in her life she is alone, and she is going to go and do things her way and all of that, and she ends up going to this small town to be like the caretaker of this like recreation center, and then she kind of, everyone around her gets involved in her life, and so it's very like A Man Called Ove in that way, and in a couple of other instances you can definitely see the similarities between those two. And I think that's another thing that worked against this book, because it could have been a lot higher if I hadn't read A Man Called Ove recently. So I enjoyed this, I had a good time with it. Once again, Frederick Bachman has written an incredible, very complicated character, and all the other characters, major and minor, were also just so deep and wonderfully explored. Like, that is something he never fails. Yeah, the plot was really where it kind of let me down, because I don't know a single thing about soccer, I don't really care about it, and it did just feel very repetitive from A Man Called Ove. That doesn't mean that this like didn't get me very emotional at the end, it certainly did. And the exploration of like, you know, when you've been so comfortable with someone for so long and trying to move on from that, and them kind of coming back and showing how much they do know you, and trying to decide like whether that's enough and all of that. Like, there was definitely some really good conversations in here, but I still didn't love it. Then I did my annual reread of Radio Silence, so I'm really not going to talk long about this because I love it. If I do an annual reread, I probably love it. So this follows Frances, who is a study machine, and she's in her final year of school, and she has been asked to be the artist for this podcast that she absolutely adores. Nobody knows that she does like secret fan art for this, and she thinks that it would be something that people would like judge her for, because she is study hardworking Frances and not, you know, artistic creative. And so it just follows her as she goes through her final year of school and the friends she makes and all of this, and I love it. It has a very special place in my heart. I will say I didn't enjoy it as much this time. I still give it 5 out of 5 stars because of course I did, but the audiobook, not good. Not good. It has the same narrator who narrated for Leia in An Ember in the Ashes, and I loved her narration in that, but I don't know what about it, but that is just not the way that this book is. And so like I loved her voice for that, but not for this one. So I ended up having to switch over to physical like halfway through it, and I was just having 10 times better of a time when I was physically reading it, and once again it still hit me right in the feels. And I always say this isn't necessarily something I would recommend to a lot of people. It's kind of something I would recommend to people in a very specific situation, which is basically when you're getting near the end of like secondary school, high school, whatever you call it. Because I read it when I was like 4 months away from finishing secondary school, and I was very much like Frances, and I also was very like, I don't know what I want to do with my life, and I still don't. And so maybe that's why I still love this book a lot. And so yeah, so that is why it has a very special place to me, and so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everyone out there. And I'm not someone who absolutely adores YA contemporary at all, but I read this at the right time in my life that it just made such a huge impact that I absolutely adore it. So yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for everyone, but I do love it a lot. So the next one was Dragonhaven by Robin Hobb, and again this was another one where I think the audiobook impacted my enjoyment. So I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. It was a lower 4 stars than Dragon Keeper was, even though I think like if I look at it objectively, I do think this is better. But because of the audiobook, I had such a terrible reading experience, because every single book by Robin Hobb I have read the audiobook and listened along, except for Assassin's Apprentice. I read most of that physically, and then like the last like third I listened to and read at the same time. But I put the audiobook on, and it's a different narrator from the first book in the series, which I hate when they switch narrators in the middle of a series. Keep it consistent, guys. Keep it consistent. And I know they go back to the first one, on SCRIBD anyway, they go back to the first one for the third book, and then they go back to the Live Ship Traders narrator for the fourth book in the series. So I might be able to get over that, but it was a completely different narrator. I did not really enjoy their narration. And yeah, so that very much impacted it. And then the formatting on the audiobook was horrible, because the chapters didn't line up. So there was about 65 chapters in the audiobook, despite the fact there's only like 20 chapters in here. So they like basically cut, so like you'd be in the middle of a chapter of the physical book, and the audiobook would cut out in the middle of a paragraph and skip to and then start a new chapter, which is just the exact same chapter, but there would just be like a huge gap as it like switched over. And I'm like, why did they do that? They didn't do that for any of the other books, which were written and like I presume produced as audiobooks before this one was. So why this one did they decide to do that? I hated it. And that is literally just the audiobook. I haven't spoken about this book at all, mostly because I can't, because it is the second book in the fourth series in the Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. So the first series follows Fitz, who is a boy who is the illegitimate son of the king in waiting, and then he gets brought to the keep. His father abandons his post. Poor Fitz, all alone, eventually becomes an assassin. Now we are talking about dragons. So we've come a long way from there, and so now there are dragons in the world, and in this series we follow the people who are who have been given the job to keep them safe and to get them to this supposed magic city, which they're not sure still exists. And so this just continues directly on from the first book, and this definitely does feel like the second half of that story. Like, it feels like Dragon Keeper and Dragonhaven are really one book. That's why I think that this one like objectively is better, because Robin Hobb is known for like her so slow starts and all of that, and that's what Dragon Keeper was. That was like the slow start of the book. And then this was like the really interesting like second half where like stuff really starts to happen. I love the character development in here. There was a lot of interesting discussions about like pregnancy and sex and women, you know, getting to choose and all of that. And so I really enjoyed that conversation. So I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. And then the final book that I read in the month of December, I read this in like 5 hours on New Year's Eve, was Anxious People by Frederick Mockman, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars as well. I love 4 out of 5 stars, and I love 3 out of 5 stars. This one was impacted by the fact I read it so quickly. I think this book would have been a lot, I probably might have actually gotten the 5-star if I had like taken my time a little bit more, because there was a lot of like interesting connections, and I did get them, but I think if I like sat with some of the chapters a bit longer, might have enjoyed it more. But I have a bit of a tradition going where I like squeeze one last book in on New Year's Eve. So I decided this because on the back it says it's set on New Year's Eve. It's actually the day before New Year's Eve that it's set. So this follows a bank robbery gone wrong. So our bank robber fails their bank robbery and then runs into this apartment viewing. And so all of the people there just end up kind of having an interesting discussion. And I think it surprised me in some positive and negative ways. So yeah, so there's like some really interesting plot twists and all this. But I think another thing that impacted my enjoyment was the way the story was told. I didn't see it coming, which I don't know why I didn't see it coming, because this is like the 4th book I've read by him now. And I should know by now that he loves multiple timelines. And so, but for some reason I was surprised when this wasn't just a book that like the bank robber robbed in and then they spent like 400 pages just talking to each other. Like, I don't know why I was surprised by that, but for some reason I was. A lot of it we followed the police officers who are father and son as they are working on this case. And And by like the end of the book, I really enjoyed that aspect, but like for the first third, I found it very slow and it kind of took me a bit to get into. But by the end, absolutely adored it. So yeah, so the characters, again, just like with Britt Marie and every other Frederick Backman book, characters are absolutely incredible, so deep, and each of them are connected kind of, or they're connected to each other or connected to this apartment in really interesting ways. And it's definitely one that I will reread in the future to see if I enjoy it more, but for now, it is a 4 out of 5 stars. Those were all of the books that I read in December. I read quite a few, and yet I feel like I read nothing. But that's because I did that weird reading thing that I do where I read like a book in 2 days and then I did not read anything for a week. So that was fun. But these are like the physical ones that I own. So yes. Oh, thank you guys so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed. If you did, subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.